I'm Ron Schaefer, owner and founder of SolarWind Media Group and SpiritFaire. When I created SpiritFaire some years ago, its purpose was as an inspirational arts festival, meaning a place where the unity of humanity could be given full expression in its diversity through the arts. It was open to all forms of artistic expression in the visual and performing arts for both amateurs and professionals, and for people of every ethnic and racial background, as well as every religion or philosophical. On occasion, we concentrate on a theme or specific type of program that carries through the entire event for that year. For 2018, we decided on the medium of film and a theme of domestic concerns related to women's issues for two reasons. One, 2018 began with the Me Too movement and its related campaigns. And two, we were housed at a women's college, Alverno College of Milwaukee, a place we'd stayed at before, which itself is heavily focused on its curricula of nursing and social work for all its female student body. As most of the films chosen were already part of the SW Media catalog, and as a lot of them pertain to such issues, as you will see, we felt it was a good fit for us and them. Unfortunately, the Alverno staff did not see it that way and later banned us from campus, deciding that none of the programs were in accordance with the values of either school or church, it being a Catholic university. What you are about to see is a composite of the discussions held during the festival. In each case, a film was shown and discussion followed pertaining to issues raised. Invited guests were professionals involved in the various fields covered, and all was open to the... Surprisingly, few people wanted their voices heard or images captured, even among the pros. Only those people who were comfortable on camera were recorded. Because of this paucity of opinion, I added some additional interviews of people who could not make the event at the time in order to fill out the program with more perspective. My thanks to colleague and social worker Diane Blur, who was able to make most discussions and was willing to add some consistency. There are 8 discussions here, each running about hours total. The film is divided into 2 parts, the first concentrating on domestic problems, the second dealing with public situations, as well as issues with the elderly. For those who wish to skip past some, all of these discussions are available as separate episodes on the SolarWind website and on YouTube. A brief word on the pushback of the event. When the festival was proposed to Alverno, they wanted a breakdown of films and subjects, which they got. When they stated they might have a problem with some programs, we were willing to work with them on it, as any venue has the right to what they want on their premises. We also had access to a second venue, which we were already using. When it got back to us that they considered some programs unacceptable, we agreed to work out a new arrangement. It was after we agreed to this that we were told we were banned from... Since Alverno is a school that is primarily a school of nursing and social work, why would the subjects seen here in this film be considered unfit for their students? There is no guarantee that when they graduate that their work in the real world will not include these subjects, nor will they only work with and for people who have the same religious beliefs as them. So wouldn't it be to the students' benefit to take in such discussion? One program considered unacceptable and not recorded here is a program on mediumship and its history going back to the Bible. If this was against school and church policy, why then did they schedule a psychic fair on campus on the same day as our event at the other end of the building? When asked about this double standard, we were given no answer, nor was there a student outcry against our ban either. Nor was Alverno the only problem. The local FBI claimed as a standing government order that they cannot send a representative to any event where tickets are sold, even though we are a nonprofit supporting other nonprofits who work with the FBI on issues like trafficking and never offered anybody a paycheck. And so we are self-supporting and work with volunteers. So too was the Milwaukee Police Department, initially happy to send an outreach supervisor until the cancellation at Alverno forced us to move to our second venue in Greendale. They then claimed that they could not talk to the public on subjects like guns, terrorism, and trafficking if it was outside of their borders. This seems to imply that such issues never cross borders, or residents from Milwaukee never go to events in Greendale. As for the Greendale PD, they are so small that they would have literally pulled a policeman out of a squad car to talk to the audience, as they have no outreach program. And as for the County Sheriff's Department and the Wisconsin Health Department, neither returned our calls. Planned Parenthood did, but turned us down. If we are to create an informed and responsive public to the needs and issues of its citizens, especially on those elements that may negatively impact the community, and to which such organizations are paid to protect, then foregoing opportunities to help and educate the populace by such institutions needs to be better addressed. Dismissing programs either through bureaucratic snags, not fitting a certain reality bubble, or because staffing has no place on the calendar for it, seems self-defeating. For the record, SpiritFaire does not discriminate on the grounds of religion, ethnic background, gender, or orientation. Any cancellation of any program was not a determination made by SpiritFaire or its parent, SWMG, but was the decision imposed by others. And now,
it was pretty obvious that the father had an inferiority complex. He had to be macho and be bully and tough to prove his manhood. And he...
You know some political leaders that are just like that.
Yeah, right, exactly. Exactly. That's a very, very good way of putting it.
Can't you try somebody else?
No, it's gotta be you.
Blaine Davis, Man of the Year. It's got a nice ring to it.
And he also felt insecure, and in many ways, in his manhood, he took advantage of his daughter in a way that was totally inappropriate.
Some of those old crows that used to sit back on their haunches and throw jabs at me are stewing in their own swill now.
I'm ready to go.
What's all this? What's that crap on her face? My God, she looks like a common troll.
You didn't think you could gain the fountain of youth by repressing your only child.
Babble, babble, babble. Don't give me any of that Sigmund Freud $9 word psycho crap.
He had to prove his manhood, and even in trying to finally accept an award, he stumbled over the words because he felt an insecurity, but he didn't have to go to that extreme. He could have just accepted the award.
Afraid of a stab.
You don't look great.
Your friend of mine, Blaine Davis.
He felt he needed to hold on to everything and not let it go because he was afraid he would lose it, and therefore not being able to prove he was a man enough to hold on to.
It's like dancing with a moose. Oh, stop it, Blaine! Stop it, for heaven's sakes, you're drunk.
I'm sorry. I forgot. For a minute there, I thought you were my wife.
And whose fault is that?
You touch one hair on my little girl's head, and you funk.
With your background in psychology, etc., and some of the issues that you've had to deal with people, is this typically a male thing, or do women also suffer from this kind of malady, let's call it?
Being a female, I think you have a tendency to often see it in males. So I have to analyze it while I'm speaking to you to try to formulate whether it's strictly a male thing or a female thing. I think males have been, in our society, put something on them to make them feel that they have to be the strong one. the macho one.
Well, they're more outward, they're more aggressive. The women tend to be more inward and more depressive. They take it out on themselves a bit more.
Oh, that way, okay, that's what you're talking about. I think I have seen women do that, how do I say, be inwardly, you're talking about people that overeat and
Yeah,
fight
that's one
on
way.
themselves, right? Or the more demanding type of things. I have noted women that are very aggressive and appear to be having their act together, so to speak. But when it suited them well, I think our society refers to them people that are how do I say, false face, seem nice one minute, stab you on the back in the next minute, because they don't get enough stroking. They might not feel that they're as attractive or liked as much as somebody else or as powerful a position as somebody else, and they have to be the best of everything. Is that what you?
Yeah,
the same-
that's
same issue?
sort of, that's how it manifests.
Right.
When those are the seeds that show the symptoms of any kind of strange behavior, let's say. In the case of, like, the guy in the movie, we had a case where he was really trying to control everything, and he did it by domineering,
And you, excuse me for interrupting me, but you said the key words, controlling everything, because they don't have control of their own life. And they're not in control or at the place that they want to be recognized as being somebody to look up to.
And in this case, it's all about business. It's all about the outward expression in the world. Whereas we were talking about women that might be more about themselves or their appearance, or
And there are business women in the world.
well, now the movie was set in 40, 50 years ago, so it was like 1960. So the culture has changed quite a bit, but probably the underlying principle is still there as far as the way women react on things when they're not happy with themselves or their lives.
That's true. I recall when I was working in a hospital years and years ago, and there was an administrator or someone who was the head of a certain department in the hospital who had a very similar type of a personality. And it was pretty subdued until once in a while you would see it come out in ways you wouldn't anticipate or expect it. So yes, it does come out in women as well, and it was in the 60s that some of these women were already expressing this because they had to prove themselves and be better and felt insecure in their position. But not all of them. There's just some of them, like perhaps they didn't feel like their daughter wasn't as attractive, and they wanted her to be, more popular, and I'm better than her because, well, she may be a nurse, but I'm not, but I'm in this position. Very competitive, and could be dangerous in the right position, in manipulating type of situations. In this particular film, it was really outstanding because I saw other things too that it reminded me of a friend, and the house was even similar to a friend who wanted power, and that's basically what he was looking for in a sense too, a need for recognition, a need for power, and he got dabbling with a Ouija board, and with the Ouija board he didn't get anything, and when he walked out they felt something rub against him, and he in fact became possessed. Now what was interesting is because the staircase in that house, when I went to visit it, where he had done the Ouija board, there was blood on the wall, and it was like what happened to his daughter, and there was some kind of attachment. When the person passed away, they apparently the attachment was still in the house and attached themselves to something, and this is not unusual. And drinking tears your auric band, opening it up for somebody to come in and attach themselves to or something. And so our world is so much more complicated then what we recognize is just not the physical manifestation. He did things that I'm sure he didn't mean to do. He was totally out of control, but he thought it was manhood, and it was just something he did. And it manifested some horrible effects to death.
Now, going from the person who is out of sync, let's say,
Okay, good point.
going from that person to anybody that they're interacting with, in this case, family members, could be a daughter or a son, could be the wife, could be all of them, could be friends, you know. What do we see as far as the bleed over from this insecurity or whatever is the base of it into behavior towards them, into when it finally manifests as some kind of abuse, whether it's psychological or actual physical?
I think when you see somebody who has that, you kind of pick it up, you sense it, and something's not quite right. And sometimes they can be just totally demure and seem right with it, but maybe a little phony. And many times when they come across to you, the other people will say to you, you know, they're really nice to you and everything, but behind your back, you should hear what they're saying. And you, many times with the people that they're putting a false face for, you really have to bring that to their attention and make them recognize it, because they could get hurt in some way, be it a male or a female, you know, or be taken advantage of in an improper way. That person sometimes can be corrected if they're properly handled. I'm talking about without a therapy type of a thing. Giving them strokes, you know, engaging them and making them recognize what they have, the potential they have, what they can do, what they have done, and making them have more self-confidence in themselves, because that's really what they need. Somehow they had been, perhaps by their own family, sabotaged or feel insecure, or something in their past made them not feel they were good enough and never could be. And to bring them back into the realization, yeah, you are, and you can, and you know, you will do this. They take the baby steps and they get there. They're getting in a better place and better position to be less feeling a need to have to prove themselves all the time. And by belittling, you know, like the bullies, belittling other people, that's a good step in the right direction.
Well, there are 2 points you brought up that I wanted to get to.
Okay.
Because basically the theme of this is what are the signs of domestic abuse, and obviously every situation is different, every person is different.
Yeah.
But what are some general signs of it, and you kind of touched on that already, and then what are some of the remedies, and you kind of touched on that already. And then I wanted to go from that to the generational thing, because we know that patterns of abuse tend to go from generation to generation to generation.
Right.
And I was just wondering if you had some notions that, you know, what are some of the signs you can recognize, and what are some of the steps to break away from that? It's a big question. But
Yeah, I was like, oh, where did it go? Where did it start from? Oh, okay. How do I say? One of the expressions are victims victimize. Okay, which seems horrible. What you know? How could that be? How could a victim victimize because they're a victim themselves? But it's their pattern. They don't know anything else. So let's say somebody is raped by their father or mother. They may also do the raping, or somehow create a child that does that. It happens. It doesn't happen all the time, but it can do that because your pattern, or their father drinks, so they drink, or they're how do I say? They're a good example. The father is the example, so the children either emulate or they go the opposite direction, and they're nothing like that particular parent. It depends on the individual and the child, how they're treated too, and how they adapt. So you can have a child that might say, I'm not going to be anything like him, he's, you know, and they leave early, and some of them will say, I'm not
this is how
a
I
man. If you know something is happening, you can block it. You can become aware of it and be able to learn how to be strong enough against it. But if you don't know, it's easy.
I just wanted to go on one last point. Families. Families are not what they used to be. They're sort of different, and that's because of the roles of men and women have changed. The economy has really changed.
Yes.
We're all kind of separated much more than we used to be like half a century ago. We are connected by our cell phones, but that's not exactly the same thing as human contact, and that brings up a whole bunch of new problems. So I'm just wondering, how much do you see as far as the changes that are going through, they're pretty rapid, might be affecting patterns in negative ways that might lead to various kinds of abuse, apart from what we've already been talking about?
I would totally agree with you. I have had people that I've spoken to who have the daughter or their granddaughter come in with the baby, the great-grandchild, and she's thinking she's going to have a good conversation with her, and she's on the phone all the time, talking on the phone, not even looking at the baby, and the grandmother's thinking, she comes here to talk to me, she's not even talking to the baby. I'm so worried about this baby. Is it going to eat? Is it going to do? The baby's crying, she's not even paying any attention. Yes, I would agree. You go to somebody else and you say they're in the restaurant. The husband's on his phone, the wife's on her phone, the kid's got a phone in front of them. And it's like, oh my gosh. You go grocery shopping. I saw this couple grocery shopping, and they were a very young couple. They looked very intelligent, and they weren't on their cell phones, and they put their little guy in the chair into the, how do we say, shopping cart, and then they put a little cell phone like right in front of him, and the kid's like with his head right into it. And I'm thinking, oh my God, that kid's not going to be able to communicate, not see the things around him, not become assimilated to grocery stores, what people are like, how to interact or smell foods and see what things are.
Well, there's a big thing going on with social media, and that seems to really be affecting kids like in middle school, etc. And that is basically gossip, shaming each other over their cell phones and stuff, and that's been leading to all kinds of emotional problems and even suicides for very young people.
That's not good.
Yeah. So there's electronic abuse.
And who would think, right?
Yeah.
That's frightening. It's a positive thing, but it's not good because that develops a whole new area you have to deal with.
Yeah, I don't think any of us know how to deal with it yet because it's all too new.
Hi, I'm Deanne Lawson. I am the Executive Director and founder of Inner Beauty Center. Inner Beauty Center started about 6 years ago in response to a high amount of prostitution on our church steps, and also a young lady coming in and saying to us that God told her if she came in, we would help her. At that point, I did not understand what human trafficking was. But it was several months later, after we did help her and help her get home to her family in another state, that we realized that she was a victim of human trafficking. So that's how we started, and we realized that rather than looking at the women as being criminals or making a choice to do this, we realized that in all of the things that have happened in their lives, that the choice really wasn't theirs, that they just found that this is where they were at and being forced, either emotionally forced or physically forced, or sometimes controlled by drugs to be out there frequently, selling their bodies and making money for someone else, not even for themselves. So Inner Beauty Center provides a drop-in center. We are open 2 days a week. Then we also do street outreach at least once a week, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. And in that process, we're making connections with women. It takes a long time for them to feel comfortable and to build up trust. And so once they come in, we start to build that trust. We provide clothing, we provide a meal, we provide personal care items, but also we provide connections to services that they need to actually start their life over. So,
How many people work with you?
we have about, I want to say maybe 15 to 20 volunteers and that come, some on a weekly basis, some will volunteer once a month to do street outreach. And so we average about maybe 100 hours of service hours every month, sometimes 160, but our average is around 100 hours, volunteer hours each month.
And where do your volunteers come from?
All over. We have, we were founded in the Assemblies of God because that's the church that we were at when we started, but that is not our denomination. We are faith-based, and so we have people that come from Lutheran churches and Elmbrook type churches, and we also have a couple of retired nuns that volunteer with us. So we're not stuck to any one denomination. So as volunteers hear about us, they will fill out an application that is available online, or they will stop in and call, email, and then we do an interview process and background check, and then just get people involved wherever they need or want to be involved.
About how many people on average do you see or take care of or deal with in some way at any one time?
Okay, so in a month's time, we have on average about 40 contacts that come into the drop-in center. Now that might be the same person 3 or 4 times, but in a 1 month period of time, it averages about 40. Street outreach, it varies just depending on the weather and things that are going on. It could be as many as 30 or 40 contacts on the street in a month, and sometimes maybe 20. There's so many variables. Last year we had 98 women that came into our drop-in center and received services here.
How do you usually handle the outreach or the outside contacts?
They're very limited in time. We allow the woman to either initiate that contact or refuse it. So what we have learned with a woman who's out there who's being trafficked, that sometimes their trafficker is watching, and for them to talk to us puts her in danger and also puts us in danger. So we always give the woman the right of refusal. And so if we try to talk to her and she just goes the other way, or she says, I can't talk right now, we leave her alone for that night, and hopefully we'll have a chance to see her again in the future. We limit the amount of time that we spend talking to a woman, because we know that if she is trafficked, at some point somebody is going to be driving by checking on her, and we don't want to interfere with the money, because the pimps, the traffickers, it's all about the money. So we really limit that, and in the last 6 years, having those policies, having that approach to reaching out to the women has served us well, because we have not had any issues with anybody threatening us or coming after us. We've seen a few who've walked by or come up, and if they do, then we just politely move on, say, hey, nice talking to you, and we leave that area. So, but we've never been threatened by anybody.
How much interaction do you have with the police?
We are building relationships with the police. I do attend different meetings, like crime and safety meetings. I do also attend like District 2 meetings on like the community prosecution unit. And then also we have some connection with law enforcement in response to a Milwaukee Joint Human Trafficking Task Force, that it's a combination of service providers and law enforcement. And so we're building those relationships, and we do work together.
The thing that's spurred on this discussion group for this festival, this event that I put together, was the movie Human Trafficking, which was made, I think, in 2006. It's now 2018. First of all, how accurate do you think that depiction was? I know it was a fiction film. And secondly, how much do you think things have changed over those 12, 14, 15 years?
Well, I think human trafficking is pretty much the same. There are some variables, but it's been there all along. We just haven't been able to identify it. It's been hidden in plain sight. So, of course, when you're looking at something from Hollywood, there's always some liberty taken here and there. But the truth of the matter is that when a trafficker is grooming somebody who will be his victim, he will go to all sorts of lengths, because especially with a young girl, because he knows that he can make far more money every month off of a teenager, off of a 14, 15, 16-year-old than what he can make off of a 25 or 30-year-old. So the target is really the younger population. And so you have different types of traffickers out there. Some have they have several employees, if I can put it that way, but they refer to it as their stable. And so they can have up to 10 women or more working for them, not necessarily all in one area, but in sometimes different states or different parts of the state. And then you can have a trafficker who's really like a boyfriend or a drug dealer, and they're just, say, hey, you need to pay this, we need to pay this bill, you need to go out there. So trafficking can look a little bit different in a variety of settings. But then there's also labor trafficking. Wisconsin has a fair amount of labor trafficking that happens in the northern part of the state, where the crop farmers are and the big dairy farms, things like that. So it's not just about sex trafficking, there's also labor trafficking that happens in restaurants and hotels and massage parlors and nail salons and in farming, in manufacturing. So it really is widespread.
There's been a lot of notice in the news lately about Milwaukee being sort of, or it's had an uptick in this kind of trafficking behavior, or there's been more reports of it, or something like that. How does, first of all, what led to Milwaukee being a target? I mean, all cities probably are, but what led to Milwaukee being a particularly good target lately? And how does it differ from any other city of about the same size?
Well, Milwaukee, I think, has always had this issue with human trafficking. Like I said, I think it's been hidden in plain sight because we haven't recognized it. I really believe human trafficking is very much like the issue of domestic violence 25 years ago. And so at that point, we were just starting to have assessment tools and resources and safe houses. And so now we're just starting to recognize it, and we're just starting to provide services. So Milwaukee, part of the thought is that because Milwaukee is a thoroughfare between Chicago and Minneapolis, there is a lot of activity in Milwaukee for that reason. There seems to be a tendency that Milwaukee is a place of recruiting and training. It's not a destination point. So, for example, about 2 years ago, a report came out that in the Dakotas by the pipeline, that 85% of the women being arrested for prostitution were listing Milwaukee as their home address. So it's an origin site, and then they're trained and taken out from there. And I think there's also a number of other reasons. We're a segregated city. We have a section of Milwaukee that is very impoverished. But now what we're seeing, a change that has occurred, is that we're seeing women out on these streets that are suburban girls. They're not just that typical inner city girl, and they're not even all Caucasian. We were seeing mostly, majority were African American. Now that number last year completely flipped. We're seeing more Caucasian out on the streets, and they're suburban girls who are heroin addicted. And so that has really influenced the shift. Also social media. And there's many reports of of pimps having recruiters in high schools and recruiting on social media, and it's just really kind of opened a whole can of worms.
It led me to a question that I was going to ask you. How much of the recruitment going on are domestic? In other words, are natives, they live here, as
Almost everybody.
as opposed to like refugees who have come here and are just looking for homes and then suddenly get sucked into the system?
For what we do and the women we contact, I would say 99% are from the U.S. and are from Milwaukee. There's a few that we have met that have been brought in from a different state, but most of them are from this area, born and raised in Milwaukee or suburban. Then the areas that you'll see foreign-born individuals will be in massage parlors and nail salons and restaurants and hotels, and then also the labor trafficking end of it with working on farms up in north and central Wisconsin. So there is that mix. That's where you will see more foreign-born individuals. And some may have come here legitimately with work visas, but then they get here, and then the person that they're contracted to work with confiscates their identification, their visas, and then makes them work and sells them around to other people to labor, and without having adequate pay. So there are foreign-born individuals, but the women we work with, a majority of them are domestic. They're from here.
Is there a lot of crossover between the labor trafficking and the sex trafficking?
There is an overlap, and you can see it in places like nail salons or massage parlors, that sort of thing. Maybe in hotels. There is an overlap, so there can be a combination of labor and sex trafficking. I don't have any statistics as to what that would be.
How much of a speaking of statistics, how much of a record or a survey or information is actually being gathered on this kind of stuff these days?
Well, I think as they're starting to identify it more, then it's now more reportable. I know that the state of Wisconsin is working on a reporting tool for law enforcement, but that was a few years ago, and I don't know where that's at. But I do know that there is an increased awareness, and there is an increase in identifying it so that now it can be reported. But I think that most human trafficking, labor and sex trafficking, is largely underreported.
What do you see right now as your biggest obstacle, whether it be politics or whether it be business or something else, culture or whatever? What do you think is the biggest block into getting people the help they need or getting people out of the system or whatever?
Well,
what's your biggest fight against?
Our biggest fight against is finding safe, sober living for the women. If they have not been addicted, we have very few places across the U.S. where a woman can go, especially a woman with a child, where they can have restorative services that's residential, that can provide those restorative services. So that's like our number one biggest obstacle. And then when you add drug addiction in there, that next obstacle again, it's that safe, sober living programming that will not only deal with restoring the emotional damage and fixing that part of it, but also helping them deal with their drug addiction. So it really is, our biggest problem is we have somebody that wants to get out. Once they go through detox, where do they go?
Do you work a lot with clinics, or do you find clinics receptive to what you're doing?
We work with we have working relationships with a number of detox centers and that are inpatient, and then programs that are residential programming specifically for women. But again, they're pretty few here in Milwaukee.
Pregnancy, how big of a issue is that for you to deal with?
We've had a number of ladies who were pregnant and still out there working some were drug addicted, and I wouldn't say that we see it a lot, but it does occur. And so some of the women end up having abortions. Some, the trafficker would rather that they keep the baby, because then that becomes a pawn in order to manipulate her to do what he wants her to do. So they use the child against the mother. So
And STDs?
High, of course, you know. Although a lot of times the women are really pretty good about being tested and using protection. They almost always in street outreach, they're asking for it. Our organization does not hand out protection, but we do have a number of places that we do refer them to, and different organizations that are out on the streets that can help them. This is our Remember Me tree. We put this up about a month ago when on Greenfield Avenue there were 4 murders. 3 were women, 1 was a male. We had contact with all 3 of the women who were murdered, and 1 had actually been in our drop-in center. So we decided to put together this Remember Me tree. All of the women, all the birds on here represent women who have been either murdered or died from overdose in the last 5 to 6 years. I know there's going to be more as women come in and they say, hey, what about so-and-so? So we're going to keep adding to this. But it is kind of a reminder that there are a lot of women out there whose lives have been lost. This one here is actually a mother-daughter team. Mother died before daughter was recently murdered in that group of murders on Greenfield. So we just want to remember the ladies. We do build relationships with them, and we want to bring some meaning and importance to their lives. I think educate yourself. Go online, go to Polaris Project, go to the Blue Campaign, which is part of the Department of Justice, Homeland Security, and ICE. There are tremendous educational tools available online. Educate yourself, and then have some resources. Sometimes it's just as simple as having the human trafficking hotline number available that you can just slip somebody on a card so that they know they can call that place for help. And the human trafficking hotline number it does work. And it is a national hotline number that works with law enforcement and service providers to people who are labor
I've
or
worked
sex
in a
trafficked.
sexual assault center, and we've had clients come in that were little children, little babies, that were abused sexually by males, of course. Have worked in other agencies where you find people that are teens, that are churches that are not really legitimate churches, trying to put girls together to become prostitutes.
Now, how often did you run into something like that? Because churches seems creative, let's put it that way.
Yes, it's only one. It was one of these churches that you can get your ministry out of a Cracker Jack box kind of a thing. You're not going through the official long length ministry type of thing. It's a short term thing in the corner church in the street, you know, and in a neighborhood that most people wouldn't want to go through type of a church, and was able to find a lot of information, fortunately, on the internet about how young girls are turned into prostitutes and the procedure it happens to go through, and gave one of the individuals this information, and they handed it out, and the girls worked together and they caught them, which worked out well. But the problem is how many young girls don't have that information. How many young boys don't have that information? Little boys can become prostitutes as well. You know, the problem is that it's almost like an alien invasion of evil aliens from somewhere else that don't respect the psyche of a human. I mean, not recognizing the spirituality, that we're all one, we're all part of a spiritual balance, and they're like treating entities like we treat other species that some of our people, the people, don't think of as having a life force in it at all.
Beasts of burden.
Right.
But
Something to use.
but it's all about money.
Well, there's something wrong if it's just all about money.
Yeah.
It's like they're possessed. It's like they're on drugs. They're getting subliminal messages from somewhere else, and it's making them not even be human anymore. It's
Now,
nothing bad.
what sort of things did you do in connection with dealing with people that have been through this process?
I think most of the people that I have dealt with, how do I say, they have to heal. In order to heal, you have to talk about it, and I think there's not enough of that going on. And I think it's not only true with the women, it's also true with the men. I find my understanding is, because also we've had cases when you come into a hospital emergency room, you find the males are also victims. And the problem is it's hard enough for a girl to try to discuss this and explain to people and talk about it and get it out than it is for a male to even admit that such a thing would have happened. It makes him try to, or how do I say, it makes them start to feel that maybe they're not masculine enough, maybe they're more effeminate, and maybe they should be more gay. And the same thing with the females. And they begin to dislike that opposite sex. And the issue is that makes them push other people away from them, but they have to be able to discuss it and talk it. But some people aren't ready for that. They don't know how. And how do you know you're not talking to somebody who isn't going to try to victimize you again?
What is the age range of the people that at least you were exposed to?
The age range in people being victimized is from a young baby. And I think there was something recently in the news about that to, I would say, a lot of older women have in the past. And what I really want to say is that when I worked in the sexual assault center, we find women crying and saying, "Thank you, God, you're finally doing something about this." There have been so many of us for years that there was nothing out there for us. And that needs to be recognized. Something has to be done for it. You know, even so many of the programs in the movies and stuff are subliminally giving people messages that this is the in thing. You know, people in the, how do you say, in the 40s, in order to feel cool and in, they did the, I'm sophisticated and popular. I'm drinking my wine. Well, now the new subliminal thing is drugs. And our 60s, they went through that, and a lot of people died from the drugs because they're poisoned.
Now, are you talking about the victims or the clients or both here?
I would say the people that are the clients, because once they have that ripped and torn around them, they try to, okay, thank you. Victims, victimized is one of the expressions that is used in that particular line of healing them. Because if somebody has been victimized or raped themselves, they're more inclined to rape somebody else because they think that's the way it's supposed to be done. Or vice versa. If you've been raped, you might not so much a person being raped will do it, but the idea is they're victimized, they'll be victimized or not be will victimize someone else. Because it's a revenge type of a thing, or they feel that's how they get their love, or that's the only way they knew how to get love, because they don't understand it if they were too young of an age to go through that period of time. And some of them become feel like sappers. You tire out around them because they're so torn, their auras are all ripped up. They're just not the same. They're not as calm as they could be. They're they're feeling intimidated by a lot of different things around them. Other people might not recognize. Perhaps they'll drop their eyes more often. But sometimes that's other nationality type of things, but there's a way of feeling up. The problem is that the issue has to be resolved. These kind of things shouldn't be going on. Men should be learning how to control their body, not let it control them. Most women don't have that issue unless something has happened to them. Then there are some people that because they're subliminally watching these programs on TV or in the movies, and that are showing them that, and they're taking drugs or some other kind of a form that's causing a subliminal
Well,
reaction.
in the case of, like we saw in the
Sorry.
movie, that that choice was not theirs. That choice was forced onto them. They were kidnapped, and then the drugs were pushed into
Right.
them, and they were deliberately hooked because of the who was ever running the operation. That was how they keep them in line, and how they keep them.
And the entities that are coming in, and you're right, are the males that are drinking, which is lowering their vibration, meaning making them more susceptible to subliminal messages, taking drugs, being cool, hey, let's be a fraternity guy, or what's cool and what's in, it's the male thing to do. You know, it's all subliminal messages.
Well,
and content.
I'm trying to focus on the
Okay,
illegal
sorry.
activity.
Okay,
That somebody, you know, it's just like the drug trade.
okay.
Somebody got into that because you could make a lot of money on it. And there's a lot of similarities between drug trade and trafficking trade.
Okay, you're talking about dehumanizing.
Well, obviously it's a dehumanizing system, but what they're doing is supplying a market for, you know, black market material, for illegal material.
Right.
And in this case, it happens to be people.
Right.
So they're the ones that are supplying the drugs to keep,
To make money.
to keep their product in line and cooperative and stuff like that.
Well, I think you're making another point, whether you recognize.
So
it
it's
or not.
a little bit different than a bunch of frat boys who are just thinking about, you know, having a party and then get themselves hooked, but they're not in the business of
Well, you're,
trafficking.
You're scaring me a little bit because how I'm seeing it now, because the way you put it, it's like farmers and their cows,
Right, yeah,
controlling them,
yeah,
getting money for them,
yeah.
hurting them, killing them. Okay, the next group, and that's a frightening thought because we're not sensitive, we're not feeling what's really happening and doing something about it to change it. It's not, how do I say, biblically speaking, we're supposed to be nuts, berries, sweets, and not doing this garbage and forget the sex, what is it, Jehovah, Johann, or whatever, Jose's chapter, Jesus said,
Okay, you lost me on.
anyway, main virgin, whatever. But the fact of the matter is you made a really good point. That's a very frightening thought because it's like farming.
Mhm.
It's like they're just ranching. They're not. They see the beauty in them and then they kill them.
Mhm.
It's like somebody who's got a beautiful animal, a deer. They're beautiful, and then they kill them.
Now, of any of the folks that you've had to deal with as far as abuse goes, was it, how many were possibly products of some kind of self-inflicted emotional need, and some were, like what we just saw, illegally taken through the process? Or don't you know?
I really couldn't tell you, and I think when a person is doing this kind of a thing, there's a lot of different reasons why, and you have to go through the process of trying to determine what's going on in their head. It's not something you can always spot right away unless you can get past the illusion quick enough. But many of those people are, sometimes they do this in order to prove their manhood, and that's kind of like a lot of teenagers, oh, I'm a real man, let me put another notch on here to see if I can get a gal, to...
Have you had to deal with any of, and this, it happens to a lot of teenagers that are going through emotional problems, but I guess it happens, and I don't know for sure.
Okay.
I guess it happens more with girls than boys, but the instinct to cut themselves.
I don't... Okay, you're
Take
asking me...
a razor and cut themselves,
heard
just
people
for the
doing
sake of doing that.
I know where you're coming from, and I'm trying to think of, I'm going back to my time period versus when my time period there wasn't a lot of that going on that I knew of the people that I socialized with. I think the next generation, I started to see it happening, and is more like angry with himself kind of thing, or some other kind of issue going on. I think I've heard of it happening more in this time period.
Yeah, I think it's more common now than it was like 30 years ago.
Right. And it's concerning because there's a lot of reasons why that could be happening, and some of the things have to do with disconnectedness. I think a spiritual nature would be more rips and tears in your art band. You're not solid, you're not, let me put it to you another way. A lot of the drugs that are made nowadays, in the old days they had crossbone and skulls on them. That's poison, and they're killing themselves. And it can be cool and popular. A lot of kids go to these so-called parties that really aren't parties. They're just taking drugs. It's like Mama told me not to come, that song, don't go. You're poisoning yourself. You are killing yourself. Why would you do that? And so you're doing things that are just happening. Many people who have taken drugs, there's something that shoots off in the mind that wouldn't necessarily have shot out if they hadn't taken the drugs. And it's just like, wow, cool, wow. They're misfiring, their brain is misfiring, and it's being repeated certain things in their brain that they have no control of. And wow, like every other word. Okay, so the same thing's going to be happening if you're doing other kinds of drugs, or somebody's drugging you, and certain parts of your brain are going to be misfiring. And that is probably just as much of a misfire than anything else. So some people are saying it's self-hate, but if you're getting this into you by another means, and what is much more popular now, or was for a period of time, which is not a good thing, is people putting something in the girls' drink so they could, little freebies stuff.
That's the Bill Cosby issue right there.
Yeah, that's still going to be an issue to the other party.
Yeah.
That is really taking advantage of somebody, and it happens with males as well as females. That is really putting somebody in a form of prostitution.
Did you, how long were you involved in that kind of stuff, dealing with people?
Different portions of my life, I've worked in sexual assault centers. If you work in CBRFs, you see some things going on in places like that that are, you don't really want to discuss, but you understand what's happening in the semantics. You have to work with a lot of different people and a lot of issues where you see people being taken advantage of.
Do you see the same people all the time, or do you see different people? In other words, you get to work with one client for 6 months or however long, or do you just see various people sporadically as part of a big system that is...
I think because I've worked in a number of different type of situations, and how do I say, I've worked in hospitals, I've worked in nursing homes, I've worked in counseling centers, mental health, and those, you're going to see portions of that with a lot of different clients that you touch bases with. And you have to treat each client uniquely because they're not all the same. They're all different, and they all have different types of problems. And it takes a while to figure out how to open that door and that key. And some of them you never do, and some of them die or commit suicide before you can get to find how to help them. Because some of them feel like some of the people that I've worked with felt they were lost causes. They were not being able to help, giving them drugs to block the issues. And that in itself causes another issue. And the problem is those were things that were taboo for a very long time. A lot of times women that had been, you needed to marry a virgin, and if you didn't marry a virgin, you would marry somebody who was unclean, and you wouldn't want to marry somebody unclean. But in this day and age, it's a whole different cupcake. It's totally different, and so many victims are out there at this point in time. And more people, of course, are marrying more than one time, a different husband, different marriage. It's different kind of acceptance, but it's gone to the extreme where women and boys and babies are all victimized. It's like unrealistic. It's gone more haywire. And is it because you're just becoming more aware of it? Has it always been there? Possibly.
Well, that was a question I was just going to
Yeah.
ask you. Did you see people basically getting better? Did you ever see folks that kind of walked out the door and said, you know, they were fine, or were they all sort of stuck?
Some of the people, what we do is we just refer them to somebody who had an expertise in that. Some of them would have to have somebody who was someone special to them that they could talk to. You recommended to talk to a lot of people and repeat it over and over and over again until you get it out of your system. That can be dangerous because if you speak to the wrong person and you're on a roll and just talking over and over about it, you can become a victim again. I've not really recognized where somebody just walks out the door and says it's okay, because some people are victimized by their own family members. And that's a really tough one to deal with, because the person that's doing the victimizing doesn't really want to have anybody healed, because they wouldn't be able to take advantage of that entity anymore. And it can cause some very ugly situations in the family. But no, I have not seen anybody just walk out the door and say, hey, I'm fine. I think people, when you're traumatized, and that's a form of traumatization, you have a tendency to block things. It's like if you get in a car accident and somebody asks you right after it what happened, well, you're traumatized. You really can't give them a full report because you don't remember. Things come out little by little afterwards, but you don't remember. Some people block it so good then they have nightmares all the time. Or, you know, people respond differently.
Yeah, I remember being in a traffic accident, and I had the insurance guy come up to me, you know, within like 15 minutes. They were there all of a sudden asking me what happened, and I couldn't give them an accurate answer because I didn't really know.
Exactly.
All of a sudden I was in a crash, you know, and so.
That's exactly what it's like, you know, and that is trauma. That's what trauma does.
We got to wrap this up. Is there anything that comes to mind that you wanted to mention?
That was horrifying, and it made me have a greater awareness, and it makes me recognize that if ever I see a child that looks suspiciously not quite.
Yeah, you were just mentioning something like that the other day.
Yeah.
You had seen somebody.
Yeah, I was.
Like
Yeah, I was in a store, and you know, many times you look at kids and say hello, and these two little boys looked a little bit too grown up, and they acted a little bit too not appropriate they were like this tall and looking around a little bit strange, and you touch them and you're picking up some really bad vibrations, and the people who you thought were fathers that were with them were like not looking very fatherly either, or you know, people carrying little children that something wasn't quite right. You know, you have to report those things. You really do. And, you know, even seeing a bunch of children in a vehicle, you know, you're thinking, well, you know, you rationalize because you're not really aware of it. But from now on, if I see a bunch of kids in a van all standing, driving around, believe me, that's somebody you better call the police on, because that's got to be something that's just not right. And those kind of things do happen. I've seen that many years ago, but who would ever think, you know, that somebody would be so sick.
We just got over seeing a film about parents grieving about the disappearance of a kid.
Stop being good to me.
There are people who can help, you know?
Detective Brennan.
Are you afraid to feel?
Wouldn't you?
Every day can be a challenge. Every day I expect something. I wait to hear something.
Well, then why have you come to me?
I was hoping maybe you could give me some insight.
More than her own husband? I really doubt that.
It was your idea, I go.
I know. I suppose it's my idea that you sit around on the couch like that all day and let yourself go, huh?
Why is Monica the only one in trouble? The only one who needs to be managed? The only one falling apart?
We all feel that way, honey.
No, you don't. Or you be as moody as I am.
No news. Just another missing little girl.
I'm missing half that girl's childhood. I don't know if I can do what you expect of me.
I just want to know if you're prepared. Prepared to face a whole new world without her.
I don't know.
We need to do this. Monica, please. I need you to do this. You need it too, but I need it.
If it changes for the worse.
Anything is better than this.
And I was just sort of wondering, just to put it out there, what do you see as far as the steps on dealing with the parents who have to deal with a loss, or family members that have to deal with a loss, anything like that, anything that you've had to work with in your line of dealing with situations like that, or people dealing with the trauma that is involved with that?
Everybody grieves differently, and they don't always follow the steps logically. And I think sometimes those steps are difficult to define, because in her case, it was kind of like mom was trying to help, and it was very difficult for her because it almost made her feel like a child again, and she needed to be alone to formulate what was going on within herself and analyze what she was dealing with as well. So it's like, I really want to be alone. I really want to think about this. I really need to be alone. But she really did need that companionship. She really did need somebody who cared. And she didn't see it in her husband because she didn't understand what he was going through. They weren't married very long. And he was concerned about, how she would interpret how he was responding, if he acted a certain way. Should he become more embracing and compassionate, is what I was seeing, or should he just kind of stay his distance and let her ask for his hug, or I need a hug from you kind of a thing, versus him saying, honey, I love you, I need a hug, I'm having problems with this myself, because he wasn't really sharing initially in that area. He felt males have a tendency to feel that they have to be the strong partner, and to be tough and ready and not show any emotions and not cry. So it makes it very difficult for them to know how to respond to a woman, where on the other hand, normally, and there are women that have that strong appearance as well, are more sobbing and crying and emotional, versus where she was more looking like she was kind of reverting to being in her childhood, and she was having a headache. She was holding a lot of things within her, and she was not at a point where she could really talk about it. She just couldn't understand why he was not interacting with her and sharing with him and giving her compassion and talking about it, which would allow her to open up.
How long do you think of a process, and it's going to be different for everybody,
right,
when you're dealing with a situation where a child has disappeared for whatever reason, and there seems to be no results going on, but they have to put their lives together, and that was sort of the idea on there. What are the sort of steps that a person or a couple or whatever kind of ends up going through in dealing with that kind of stuff?
Like you said, I think every couple is different. I think a couple who isn't traumatized, and which is exactly what you are. It's just like when you get in a car accident, you're pretty much in shock. And if somebody asks you what happened, you really blanked out. And sometimes it doesn't come back to you until later on. So that's basically what you're going through, is a traumatization of an experience, going through your mind, analyzing, trying to figure out what happened, how could we have done it better. Then also you have the people that are going to go out there and say, you know what, I'm going to look. I'm going to try to find out what's going on. The police aren't doing anything. I'm going to do it myself. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes that's a bad thing, because it may be a lot more complicated than you realize. I mean, there have been children that have been kidnapped and they were like only a block away, you know, and that was at my imagination. And why didn't I look? I could have found my child. It's a difficult thing to put your finger on, you know. Alien abduction, who knows what it was? Got lost in the woods. It's very difficult. Was it a bear that took them away? Was it you fell in the water? Was it, what should I have done? Would it have been better, Mother, if I would have had my hand on them all the time instead of playing on my, you know, phone, which a number of people are doing now. What did I do wrong? And it's going to be a long process to go through that, because when you're going through it, you're probably basically everyday occasion, nothing's going to happen. Why would I would even never thought something like that would ever happen. And then the kid's gone. It's in the back seat of the car, left the car door open, just ran in the store for a minute, and the child's gone. That's really horrible. You know, that's a very difficult thing to deal with. Because that, especially with a woman who carries that child within them all that time, you're really bonded with that entity. And the closeness is a very difficult thing to let go of. And if the person, in the old days, many times they would just say, well, let's just have another kid. It's like saying, just buy another dog. It doesn't replace how you feel. It doesn't make the pain go away. You can have a stiff upper lip and block it all you want to, but you never get over it. It's just like a death. You never really get over the grieving. That feeling is still there. It can always come back and surface.
Do you have you worked with a lot of people that have, it doesn't necessarily have to be with a kid that's gone or a family member that's gone, but have you worked with a lot of people that are suffering from various different kinds of traumas? And
I think our lives in general touch with people who have gone through traumas of different kinds, whether you're talking about people passing away or animals passing. There are many things that I think we pretty much live in a society for years, and we're finally starting to reach the point where we're recognizing we need to deal with these things. It's not something we can keep pushing down. You know, we're a lot more complicated than what we've believed in years. We're more spiritual, we're more sensitive, we're more evolved, and we're more willing to deal with it. I mean, you can't just replace another body with another body. The body's not just a body. There's a soul, and you can have two people that look identical, and not just necessarily twins. We all have twins, and there are many people that look like us. The entity inside that body isn't necessarily the same personality or spirit, but the bonding, the closeness you get with that soul is so hard to replace, because you're so in tune with each other. You so really become one as an entity. Your sensitivity of how that person feels and the emotions they have are so wrapped up. It's not something you can just say, oh, well, there's another one, you know? Like, for instance, I knew a gentleman once, and he used to feed this squirrel peanuts every day, and he would call it Jack, you know, and he would feel it, and all of a sudden Jack didn't come anymore, and he was kind of broke up because he said, I don't know what's wrong, you know, because he had a bond with Jack. Well, one day Jack came back, but Jack was Jackie now because Jackie had babies. And it was a whole different emotional thing, and it was really, you know, happiness to see this entity again and all the little babies. And it's a bond. It's another soul. It's not just a body. It's not an empty shell, you know, where cardboard box to rip it up and throw it away. It's like, how do I say? Excuse me. Like in the Bible basically says we are omnipresent. God is omnipresent, I should say. God is omnipresent, all places at the same time, rather. So everything is sacred. Even this bench is sacred. We should take care of it. If you have a toy and you're a little child, you take care of it. That's respect. That's part of God. We're all part of God. The animals are the same. We're the same. We aren't just nothing, just to be used. We're something that is more a part of God. We have a job to do, and it's to interact and care for each other. And with somebody who doesn't follow suit in that type of belief system and takes that entity away from us and does damage to it, or the child is just missing for whatever reason, that's a very big part of our lives that's missing. And then we become put in a situation where we're distracted to forget and to try to put that out of our mind. Or if you're traumatized, if somebody is hurt, a lot of times people just blank things out. And how do you say you just don't remember anymore? It's not a good thing.
Have you dealt with people that have been, I don't know if sedated is the word to use, but given medication to get over things?
Oh, yes. Yeah, and that's not a really good thing, because the medication causes side effects, and then you give medication for the side effects, and you have other problems. I knew of one psychiatrist who was absolutely wonderful. His methodology of treating people was giving them vitamin B12. And I've also worked in a mental health center, day treatment services, and the best kind of therapy was teaching them how to do social dancing. They were having fun. And I'm talking about people who had some major problems and major medication problems, and it made them laugh and relax and things that are normal. And don't be pointing fingers and calling them mentally ill or anything like this. But we're getting off the subject. The fact of the matter is medication is not necessarily going to resolve the problem. I don't believe in behavioral psychology as much as I believe in reflection, meaning the person has to be able to get over the issue and talk about it. And medication often masks it rather than allows it to come out naturally and talk about it. I would suppose there may be some rare occasions where it may be necessary, but I prefer the effect of a person being able to share and talk and reflect and feel their feelings and deal with them. And many of these things that are people that are sensitive might be able to get more in tune with this person than somebody who is very deadbeat and just reading from the book kind of a script of what to do, what not to do. Because you can't help someone unless you're really bonding with them or interacting with them and feeling what they're feeling, reflecting with them. Not sympathy, but empathy and understanding, so that you can help them deal with it and find other solutions and ways to do it. Even if it's looking in newspapers or helping them help themselves to figure out what happened. Does that make sense to you?
Have you had to deal with kids on any level that may have gone through some sort of thing, or you just basically deal with adults?
I've dealt with children as well. Some very emotional issues, I would say. I think our society in general needs a lot of help in learning how to deal with children. I think the issue too is that children are really small, big people. They're more intelligent than we think they are. They share very strong emotional experiences with each other like adults do, but when adults come, or all of a sudden they start acting like children again because that's what is expected of them. They can be very, very emotional, very, very powerful, and very, very wise. And unless you give them credit for having that ability and to share and reflect with you, you're not going to see it. And you may misjudge it, misdiagnose it. It may be totally different than what you think it is, because your background may not even include the ability of something like that happening. It's quite interesting to meet some of them. I knew a little boy when I was a little girl, and we were sitting on his porch, and he was getting a very heavy discussion. He was telling me how much he loved his little brother, so much that he never wanted to part with him, who happened to be an adopted little boy from Korea, and he was adorable. He says, no, I mean it. I really, if I could be with him all the time, I would be with him. And we had this little strong discussion, and he kept saying that. So I said, well, you could pretend you are not so smart, because he was brilliant. He's getting A's all the time. He says, but I can't do that. I always get the right answer, and I don't know how to think wrong. I said, well, just do the opposite of what's right. That's what he did. Everybody thought he was mentally ill. He had to be pulled back and be at the same age length as his brother was eventually. And then I did tell him at that time, that's going to be a problem sometime, because you're going to have to reverse that, because they're going to think you're really dumb in order to be with him and going forward. So you would have to start answering questions the right way. And that's exactly what he did. So he planned all his life out as a child, what he was going to do in the future, so he could be with his brother. That takes a lot of intelligence. And it was very hard for him to think he would have to say goodbye to him, not be with him when he was the age he was, which was, he must have been about 5, 6 years old. He had to be at least 6, he had to be 6, first or second grade. And that's pretty young to be having such a heavy conversation, for him to even plan that out and act that way and reverse it when he got older, so he could be with him then on. That's a lot of strong love, a lot of strong emotion, a lot of strong feelings. I think one of the issues that was noted in the movie is they talked about having another child. And that's not going to resolve the issues of the missing child, because you're always going to look at that face and think about that other child and why you had this child. And you may love this child just as much, but it doesn't resolve or help you get over your pain with that other child. It's not the thing that resolves the issue and problem. So it's a good thing to, interact with your spouse or whoever is around you and ask for a hug. And it's okay to cry, and it's okay to share, and just make sure you find the right emotional component or person you can do that with.